Alright, hi. This is Phoebus Apollo back again for a new video blog series. I just wanted to take a moment to try to do something new. About around 2007-ish, I did a video blog series of about 10 different episodes, 20 to, I think 20 minutes, 30 minutes usually, but a couple of them went over an hour. And the purpose of the video blog was to categorize and distill my ideas, like through movie magic, into something lucid, because I do kind of have a bad memory, and I really like to document my opinions on things, because I do believe I have a unique point of view to offer people. I'm an atheist and libertarian, and those are very easy things to categorize, but myself, I've always felt like there's a lot of different points of view to have in the world today, and a lot of them are based on sort of culture attitudes, and I don't think I identify really with mainstream cultures for the most part. I've always felt like that's more a virtue than a vice. I think that a lot of people should think independently when it comes to cultural, social, political issues, and try to think objectively. And that's one of the things I try to bring to the table. And I really enjoyed doing my video blog segments when I did them. I took a long hiatus from doing it for a couple reasons. One is I used a couple very different little video clips in the segments, and I generated a couple automated copyright complaints. I don't really feel like arguing with those, so that's definitely something I'm not going to be doing, even though it kind of added a little bit of production value to the show. I really I'm going to try to stay away from that. Another thing it was a lot of composition, because I had like 5 different segments. I'm going to try to narrow it down to 3 for this series and try to keep 3 different points and try to stick to them really good. The way I want you to think of this is just hanging out and chilling with myself and kind of divulging in a couple points of view on things. And I just hope you get some sort of like positive thought or something from it. And that's really all I'm looking for out of this. So out of random people watching it. Otherwise, I'm probably going to come back and review it and think, oh, well, I actually had a decent opinion on that particular topic that night. And somehow there's proof of it. And that's always rewarding when you have a terrible memory. The first topic I wanted to discuss tonight is anytime you move across the country. I used to live in Portland, Oregon. I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When you move across the country, one of the first things you notice is a change in the food, the food businesses, and like restaurants, all the businesses around, all the different chains. And one of the things I noticed is there was a new chain in this area that we didn't have on the West Coast called Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A's basic chicken shack, more or less. Pretty cheap. If you've seen all the commercials, they advertise with like the cows saying, eat more chicken or whatever. One of the things that's controversial about Chick-fil-A, and this is sort of regularly reported on, especially recently reported because their head spokesman, passed away, and is that the family that owns and runs Chick-fil-A and provides the direction for the business is devoutly Southern Baptist, and it's sort of raises an ethical issue. Do you give money to a group that is going to pay for what's generally regarded to be extremist points of views in religion? One of the big things is that they do pay for groups that lobby for gay marriage bans and things like that. First of all, my opinion on gay marriage. The big thing about it is I have absolutely no objections to homosexuals or whatever they choose to do with their lives. I think that people should always have the freedom to decide those kind of things for themselves. But I've always objected to the idea of government having the ability to license marriages in the first place. And so it's always been kind of immaterial to me whether they ban or don't ban gay marriage licenses, because there really shouldn't be marriage licenses. It just seems kind of like an absurd thing. You can't sanctify the institution of marriage by having the government step in and do anything. The sense that the government should be involved is the sense that a marriage is always some kind of contract. And it isn't hard for governments to respect contracts, regardless of their origin or what you want to call them. And I think that a lot of people would get a lot more out of it if they sanctified the marriages less with public opinion and more with the opinion of their community. In their circles, in their religious or social circles. I think they would get a lot more out of it. That all said, though, They do spend quite a lot of money. They have their own like foundation, the Windshape Foundation. They have some subsidiary foundations that the main family, the Cathy family, is involved in financing. Another thing is the Cathy family who runs the business. They do quite readily put themselves out in the public eye regarding lifestyle choices. For instance, keeping the business open every day but Sunday, as part of a religious theme. Having subsidiaries that run the business, get involved with local religious organizations on a consistent basis, giving good, considerable amounts of money to their own foundation and other organizations that lobby against, lobby for religious causes in the political arena. And they're very vocal about this. They have a very dim view. Their family, specifically the Cathy family, has a very dim view of divorce, and they tout that they are all first-generation married couples. I think the big thing that comes into play when you are that vocal and you own a very profitable business is you should expect that people who patronize your business will make decisions on whether or not they continue to patronize your business based on your lifestyle decisions. If you're going to make it a point to bring your lifestyle decisions out to the forefront. And I don't really think a business has no right to have owners who do these things. I think that anyone has a right to express their points of view, no matter how ignorant or stupid. I think that's the only way that ignorant and stupid viewpoints will ever be challenged, is if people have the freedom to express them in the first place. And I really think that governments being involved in preventing Chick-fil-A from expanding, which is one of the major things with the franchise, is that whenever they expand into a particularly liberal area, liberals try to prevent them from acquiring business licenses or permits to be in their locale. I think that's an ignorant way to fight what is the perceived ignorance of the Chick-fil-A organization. I really think that the best way to fight it is to allow it to happen and be one of those people who makes it a conscientious decision not to eat there if that bothers you. And I know a lot of people, they don't really care. I mean, they're just going in to get a sandwich or whatever. Maybe the food's good. I haven't actually had a chance to try. However, though, I really think that this is something that people don't consider unless the management of a business, they're pretty extreme. I believe a lot of different business models have a right to exist, and I always try to patronize many different kinds of businesses. But I really think that it is important that once in a while you do sit down and you say to yourself, well, who am I really giving my money to? And that a lot of capitalists, people who are capitalistically minded, like myself, being a libertarian, I believe in free marketplaces. A lot of people like myself would rather have a sort of cynical or sarcastic attitude about patronizing businesses for ethical issues, because to them, free trade is about two people exchanging property. It's not really about somebody's personal opinion. And I really think that it is important to look at it from that point of view, because trade and economy does boil down to a certain ethics about rights and the role of government. And Chick-fil-A, my primary complaint with Chick-fil-A is they do spend a lot of money to lobby for changes for a very narrow social interest, special interest. And I really think that is something that we need to discourage in society. But I think the best way to discourage that is not to campaign, a counter campaign, the campaigning, because then you're just doing something similar but just as bad. I think really the best way to do it is to just take a conscientious point of view of the fact, of your opinion of whatever it's regarding. In this particular case, your stance on gay rights and your stance on eating chicken, and then decide, with your actions how to behave because of that. And for me, that just means I just don't eat there. There was once I was once at work, and some friends were going to go eat there, and I know that most of the people in Pennsylvania are, pretty devoutly religious. They don't really see a problem with Chick-fil-A's behavior. That's why Chick-fil-A is very prosperous here with religious groups. I kind of got uncomfortable when they were like, hey, we're all going to go to Chick-fil-A. Let's get some sandwiches. We didn't go. We wound up going to, TGI Fridays, which was a much better experience, I'm sure. I actually got a free entree out of that, too. That was pretty nice. In that sort of situation, I probably would have considered going, but, I mean, it's not about what you do on a specific day, it's about your habits. And I really think that if people are going to object to what Chick-fil-A does, it is a very simple change of your habits. Don't go there, don't eat their chicken, and, don't stand in their way of being ignorant, because it's okay to be ignorant. The only way to know that somebody is ignorant is to allow them to be ignorant. So let them do that, and hopefully they'll make better decisions for their family. And that may seem a little pompous to say, because maybe they do have a good family that's rich. But I feel like it's important that if you are a rich family, you have a better, more sort of well-rounded view of the world today and the cultural decisions and everything that has to do with the implications of their religious beliefs and the way that they decided to advocate them as a group, as a family. I really think that being a family, being a better family, involves making better decisions than they've made about it. So in terms of how they decided to interact it with their business. It's very okay to privately, it's very okay to publicly support a religious cause if you are a religious person. But I really think a lot of the motive that goes into that has a lot to do with character flaws in the family members themselves. And the reason I say that is if you review statements made by the family about their lifestyle, about the religious choices they make, they're very smug, consistently. Even their own, charter sort of principle thing for their business is somewhat smug. To glorify God by being a faithful steward to all that's entrusted to us. They have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. I understand, you're a religious person. You really want your religion just to be powerful on everybody that you visit. But these people are coming to get some chicken. I think the religious miracle is that the chicken is around to eat. I mean, that's really amazing to me. Because chicken's tasty. It's very nutritious for you. You should eat less beef. The cow thing is kind of funny that way. But I really think the reason that is their motto, their stance, the way that they decide to purport themselves in that business is because of self-righteousness. It's a certain attitude that they're a better family because of the way they live. And I don't think a family that is a better family because of the way they live spend a lot of time investing themselves into the fact that they are, in fact, the better family. It's not really a competition in that sense. I really think that if you care a lot about the way people and their families are raised, you'll spend a lot of time taking the time to care to help people solve the problems that they run into and they experience. We're going to be different problems than your problems. Having a more understanding point of view on the situation of homosexuals' relationships in in public culture. The way, the sort of attitudes they take about it are ignorant. But you can tell that by the groups that they support consistently. And you could go through the list of groups that the Wind-Shaped Foundation and some of the other groups that they openly give money to. So that does wrap up my point of view on that. I suppose the next thing I wanted to talk about was the Aurora, Colorado shootings. I did go see Batman this last weekend. I thought it was a really great movie. One of the things that I've been following lately is a Hulu special series called Spoilers. It's hosted by Kevin Smith, and they go see movies, and they discuss the movies as an audience. In response to this, I was looking forward to seeing that after seeing the film, and once the shooting happened, I knew that I didn't even know if that show would actually air or if they would even have an episode. They did air an episode, but the episode was a like a perspective on how everyone sort of reacted to that shooting as themselves, just as people going to the movie theater that weekend to see it. People who obviously are movie fans, like Kevin Smith himself. And that kind of touched base with me, so I just kind of wanted to give an opinion on it myself. And one thing that I felt about it was you can't really go to see that movie with that fresh in your mind and not sort of have that lingering in the back of your head. And I'm not one of those people who was like, oh my God, I'm paranoid. There's a bunch of shooters, in the crowd, or the crazies, and you're not going to get me or something. I'm sure a lot of people did feel that way, and a lot of people on the spoiler show gave their opinions, felt that way. Kevin Smith himself was kind of disturbed at the fact that he actually, going to the movie theater is usually a disarming, friendly experience where you get to escape. And he said himself he was a bit alarmed by the fact that he felt like he went to the movie and this is the first time he actually went and didn't feel completely safe, for sure, if he was supposed to feel safe. I didn't feel like that personally, but I kind of understand that a lot of people probably did. My general reaction, though, is you couldn't really escape the sort of remorse or tragic sense of what had happened, and knowing that you're watching a movie that some people didn't get to see, who had they made a decision not to go see this movie, they wouldn't have ever had been in harm's way in that sense. And it was just a completely random thing that you have no control over. It could have been a movie theater, could have been a sporting event, could have been any sort of group, very crowded bar, any sort of really crowded area. The idea, though, being that people were just doing what they wanted to do with their free time and wound up, being killed is sort of a result. It was a bit alarming, dismaying, and you can't really see that movie without sort of having that in the back of your head at the very least, and having sort of a little sense of remorse or tragedy about it, or anger or fear. I wasn't really on the anger or fear boat personally, but I can see probably people having that same reaction. And I think, when it comes to a situation like that where your sort of daily sense of what's normal is challenged a bit by, a tragic event or some kind of unusual circumstance, I really think that it's important that you confront that opinion, because now the tragedy is somebody else's tragedy, unless you're one of those people who are in the hospital or one of those people with families of the people who died. Now, for the bulk of us, the tragedy is not our tragedy, but the next time it is, it does happen, it could be. And we're all going to have our own sort of tragedy, in a sense, because, we are mortal. We're only around here for a certain amount of time, and then we're gone. And I think that it's very important to confront these feelings, and regardless if your reaction is anger or fear or despondency, remorse, or I suppose if you're weird, you might not be on that chart. That's probably the main ones right there in reaction to this shooting. I think that people should confront those feelings, and I think that's one of the reasons they should probably go see this movie. They should see this movie so they have that experience and they can sort of process how they feel about it. I think that's really important. So, one thing I would recommend is that if you do take the time to go see the film, throw up your opinions on how you sort of felt about it, and not the movie itself, but you're going to see it in light of the tragedy. And if you had intended to see this movie and are not going to go because of the nature of the tragedy involved around it, I would really say, really strongly encourage you to go, because I think these kind of things need to be confronted, and it's not so much the terrorist winning methodology, because there are certain flaws to that sort of point of view. It's just that you are a free person, and really the expression of your freedom is doing the things that you want to do. And if you had originally intended to go see that film, you really should see it. It was a great movie. I don't want to spoil anything about it, but it was definitely an awesome way to wrap up the trilogy. Incorporated elements from all sorts of parts of the story, and it gave a relevance to the first two movies that you wouldn't have otherwise ever thought that they would. And definitely just a great wrap up to probably one of the best comic book films made. And this is in an era right now where comic book movies are some of the top best-selling films in the movie business. So I think it was really great, and on that level. Mull that around a little bit. Go see the movie. And if you have an opinion and you sort of have feedback or something, give me what you thought going to see that film. And I think that's a healthy process for people to go through. And like I said, you don't want to wait until it's somebody closer to you to have a reaction. You want to know how you feel, So, that was my thought, and that was just sort of inspired by seeing that episode of Spoilers. I thought I'd throw that in there as part of like a little segment. All right. The last topic I want to discuss is I've always been somebody interested in politics, and I always try to break down my political points of view on things. And one thing I've stayed pretty ignorant on is Mitt Romney and his presidency campaign. One of the reasons is I'm not particularly interested in Mitt Romney. He doesn't seem like an interesting person, and he does not express his viewpoints in a way that engages me in any way. He seems kind of stuffy and pompous, and I thought, though, it would be best if I sat down and jotted down some points that I wanted to sort of mentally digest about him and sort of come to an opinion. Now, I already know what my opinion is. My opinion is I don't like him. He's a putz. He's a buffoon, and he's not very good at diplomacy and representing his own image and appearance. He tries really hard. He tries way too hard to get people to like him, and he showboats to political events, and that's part of his mainstay of all of his campaigning. The mainstay of all of his campaigning is that he's always tried to pander to people, but I've always felt that he does that a lot to overcompensate for the fact that he's naturally not likable. That's sort of like, for instance, in his recent visit to the UK to see the British Prime Minister, he was talking about how he felt that London it was not prepared for the Olympics, and it was hard to know how it would turn out, quote unquote. And that's just sort of like a boneheaded thing to say when you're in the country to establish sort of diplomatic relations, and he's not even the president yet. As far as Mormonism goes, as an atheist, obviously I have a differing point of view on religions in general. I'm not the type of atheist that's a cynical ass when it comes to religious points of view. I try my best to understand as many religions as I can and come to an opinion about them in their own context. And in the context of Mormonism, the Joseph Smith religion, I think, honestly, it's a little silly. I'm not going to try to chide people who are Mormons, because Mormons are very likable people in general, which is really weird because Mitt Romney is not likable in any way. Generally speaking, Mormon people are actually very polite. It's sort of one of the mainstays of their community is that they are just very polite, very pleasant people to be around. And in general, I mean, Mormons that I have met have been very great people. But the problem is that the religion itself, the tenements of it, are not very orderly, I want to say. Like the Mormon Bible, for instance, is a bit poppycock. I suppose that's a bit harsh to say categorically about a whole religion, but anyone who looks at the whole Mormon, Church of Latter-day Saints religious points of view, like the actual religious element of it, of Jesus coming back in Native America in colonial times or whatever. If you want a good synopsis of it, there is a South Park episode that discusses Mormonism and actually shows you the real belief of the Mormon faith. And I think that's really probably the most concise way to summarize the Mormon faith, and it's just a little silly. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm really not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be just an outright dick or anything. It's always made me suspect of people that are too strong into the faith. And when it comes to Mitt Romney himself as a person, the first thing I think is the dude is really rich. The dude has lots of money. One of the things he came into notoriety for was his work in venture capitalism. He worked with Bill Bain and Bain Capital, and they raised $37 million just fundraising for speculative investment, and made a fortune with it. Over the years, they've acquired and managed many companies. For instance, Staples was a big investment success for them. Most of their investments did not really pan out, but the ones that did more than compensated for the ones that didn't. The entire guy's presence and persona is built around the fact that he has many extensive links with people in the business world, in the religious social world, and now in the political climate. And that's sort of culminating in the fact that he is running for president. And that's a good thing, but when you're managing as many projects as he manages, leveraged buyouts of many different companies, you'll see quite a bit that a lot of it is dubious in the paperwork, and you can never really link anything to Romney's personal overseeing, but I've always had a certain feeling that when I look into how the companies that he's worked for have been turned over, so many times, even though there's a lot of things that say, Mitt Romney was not personally invested in mismanaged properties. Basically he acquired and then the management went to other people. I always felt that he was complicit in a lot of those things, and he probably personally profited quite a bit from things that wound up being speculated as fraudulent. That combined with his own sort of disposition on personal income. He's in 2010 he made about $27 million just for personal income for himself, and he paid maybe $3 million in actual taxes. A lot of that money went to nonprofit donations, especially going to the church. I've always felt like that makes him sort of a shady personality. You can see that the Obama campaigning definitely does point out his history of sending, outsourcing jobs to fix, financial problems in companies. But in a lot of ways, that is an element of investment banking success, I suppose. But it's probably not the most positive thing for the community. It makes him seem like a really just I want to say bottom feeder, but as a person who respects business a little bit, I really don't want to just say outright he's a bottom feeder. But that is sort of the persona that you paint on his face, just for being who he is, being the money that he has, and being the history he's had in business. A lot of ways his campaigning seeks to correct that image. For instance, when he campaigned for governorship, he made it a point to have campaign segments where he was doing blue-collar jobs for a day, and he'd have the camera crews all around showing him that he's a hard-working buddy, that you're your buddy, and he's going to just help you out. And he was very, very clever in making sure to point out flaws of his opponents and openly criticize them very directly and in a way that sort of made him seem like a good guy in comparison. Like when he was running against Shannon O'Brien, he took the time to point out the association to the state pension failures and the Enron scandal, and that sort of tainted his opponent. And I think it was one of the margins that helped him win that governorship. But when I look at a candidate, I try to look at what they actually do when they're in office, and Romney definitely is a business, like a financials guy. And the first thing he did when he became a governor is he just went through all the finances of everything. He raised licensing fees. He raised the gas tax, and then he closed a lot of loopholes that allowed that made taxes more fair across the board. So generated a lot more income for the state. And then on top of that, he made sure there were a lot of cuts. And even though he only generated a surplus for the last couple of years of his term, he definitely did a lot in that state to correct financial problems that the state had. Another thing that's important to remember about his history as governor is his stance on health care, which is very odd to me because he's a very open critic of Obamacare, but his health care program was basically the exact same thing. He felt that looking at the numbers, it made more sense for the state to compel people to pay for insurance than it was to have the state pay for to help leverage the extreme fees that everyone would have to pay because everyone was getting treatment from emergency rooms. And that's the biggest problem right now in healthcare. The fact that right now you don't just refuse people who haven't paid, so there are these extreme fees that you have to compensate for to get emergency care, and a lack of preventative care because nobody needs to have insurance to go get that emergency care. So it's just a very sort of ironic thing about his history that I draw to when I'm trying to paint a picture about what the guy's like. And another thing that I think really paints a picture about what Mitt Romney's about is the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority. Basically completely fucking up their project. Like they had one of the roofs cave in during making a new tunneling system in Boston. And Romney flew that group flat on its ass. And that's sort of like one of his... That's sort of like if when it comes to the way he administers as a politician, he runs it a lot like he does his businesses. He chucks things out. But it leads to a lot of situations like that happening in the first place. Major fuck-ups happening, and then, he gets the kudos for correcting them, but the proactively preventing them from happening in the first place is probably the bigger kudos, if you can make that happen. So if we want to try to understand the candidate, another good way to understand, besides just looking at his history, the things that he's done, is to actually take a look at his active campaigning and what he actually says he's going to do. I went on his website and took a quick review of the various points that he had, and I think one of the things that stood out to me right away is right at the top of his list was managing taxation. He wants to get rid of the death penalty, which is generally something that there's sort of like a rich lobby for. He wants to revoke the taxes for people that make under $200,000 a year, which is a pretty high figure, I suppose. For people who have capital gains, payments on interest, and dividends. And another thing that would be easy to overlook is he wants to get rid of the alternative minimum tax, which is a bottom barrier for... If you work the tax law to have exclusions, the bottom barrier is the alternative minimum tax, which means that at a certain level, you still have to pay that amount. You're still going to have to pay a basic amount. As someone who works a lot of loopholes for himself, and there's a lot of accusations out there that he uses offshore, holdings and to manage a lot of his money, and that's just shady, like a shady way to restructure the system. Because while I agree that the government doesn't need to tax people as much as they do, they don't need to be taxing all of their dividends, they don't need to be taxing all their capital gains, and they don't need to be taxing rich estates, just because somebody dies. As much as I agree with that, right now with the basic financial structure of the government, I think that it would be irresponsible to advocate those things at the moment until the government has vastly reduced its overall debt. And another thing is those go to benefit people who have rich family lifestyles, like the kind of lifestyle he sort of has for himself and his family. And that's something that I think goes back more to the point that I don't think that he has a full picture of sort of American society. Being in his close circles, being rich, being Mormon, which I'm not trying to bag on Mormons or anything, but he engrosses himself in that culture. It sort of puts him in his own little Romney world. And in that world, it sounds like a big priority, but to us, the average American, it just doesn't seem like that big of a priority. Even myself as a libertarian who agrees with a lot of policy, a lot of things about restructuring and minimizing the federal government's authority to tax people, it just doesn't seem realistic, or it just doesn't seem realistic. Another thing is trade. A lot of the Obama campaign ads will show that he does a lot of outsourcing and has done a lot of outsourcing during his financial restructurings of companies that he's, that was a big element of his life, is just working in business and in venture capital. And a lot of that involved restructuring businesses. And that made him responsible for a lot of outsourcing that happened in the country. And he believes that globalized trade is beneficial to the country. I do diverge with a lot of people that sort of have the merciless mindset of closed borders means better jobs for people. I think that trade is beneficial to the country. Don't get me wrong. But I do think that it is not primarily the president's job to manage business trades, foreign trade agreements. I do think that the government should have a lot of influence in sort of mitigating the negative effects that other governments have in arbitrarily involving themselves in business transactions through like high tariffs or just surplus, or just pumping money into trades that they think they can become dominant in to gain authority over a certain industry. I think that that's important, that the government does work to try to prevent, to actively prevent that from becoming an unbalanced situation for our country. But I don't think that it's the president's job to sit down and hash out specific trade agreements. Because even though diplomacy is involved in settling in trade agreements between countries, I think ultimately we should encourage businesses to interact with one another directly more often and try to stay out of their way. And I think that's what actually will benefit the country. However, Romney's stance on it is he sort of wants to oversee the way that the federal government interacts with business trade negotiations. It's almost as if he thinks that's what the president's job is, which it is not. The president's job is not to do that. The president just is not there to sit down with China, let's say, to sit down with China and hash out beneficial arrangements. That's the job of, for one, consumership. For two, individual businesses to make sure they're not being molested by a foreign country. And for three, there does need to be, a department in the government that deals with foreign trading, and but that department is not personally overseen by the president himself. He should be concerned about other elements up until the point that becomes a vast influence in how things are developing for the country. And I know that you would counter that point by saying, well, foreign trade definitely has a huge impact on the country. We lose a lot of jobs to overseas outsourcing, for instance. And we don't get a lot of jobs back very often because a lot of the manufacturing stays in foreign countries. But I would say this is that we shouldn't be too judgmental about the standards for what is beneficial or not beneficial to the country. Because I think a lot of us have misperceived ideas about, like, if trade is imbalanced in this sense but not that sense. And I think I think it's easy to get lost in that and make a lot of assumptions that aren't true about how our business is doing for ourselves. And I do think that we do generate a lot of jobs by having a lot of the foreign trade that we have. Generating jobs for ourselves and for foreign countries that would not exist if we didn't do the trading. So while I might kind of agree with his disposition and attitude about globalization, I don't think that I agree with his sense of how he sees his own role in it. I think that, if anything, he would probably make the situation much worse being a president. Someone like him, he's been spending a lot of his career dealing with big businesses, and it's easy to lose sight of the role big business plays in the society when you interact with too many of them, because when you start trading around the amount of money that he's no doubt seen past hands to determine like how to manage a business or how to deal with the assets of a failing business or restructure it so it can be successful. I think a lot of the time you lose the scope of the role of business in society, and you perhaps even think that the business has much more of an impact in society than it, just by seeing its dollar amounts, than it really does. To that extent, I think that he takes too much time to think about benefiting big businesses, because in the end, big businesses should benefit themselves by sort of existing and doing their things well. They do not need arbitrary buffs, and he certainly wants to take the time to give, energy industries, for instance, oil, natural gas, nuclear power. He wants to give them time to proliferate, and I don't think it's his job to do that, like as a president. And that's another big thing I really feel about the presidency. It is not the president's job to strictly regulate the economy. A lot of what happens in the economy doesn't happen because the president says it should. A lot of times when the president says something should happen, it doesn't happen the way we want it or intend it to. And a lot of the problems we have happens because the regulatory authorities of the government try to police what happens in the economy, and they don't do a good job of it. I think really we have to let a lot of that stuff resolve itself. Romney should know that. Romney and all conservatives should sort of have that in the back of their head, and they do when they talk about rhetoric as far as business goes. But when it comes to actually sitting down and figuring out what to do with being a president in office, clearly what he wants to do is meddle in it as much as humanly possible, which is never a good idea. So, to recap, so I've just discussed a lot of the things that, after taking a brief look into it, I saw and thought about. And in general, I don't think Romney is as competent to manage government finances as he thinks he is. And a lot of that doesn't have to do with necessarily his history as a government financier, because he certainly has a lot of attention to those details. The problem is he sort of bases in his own reality, in a way, of what the norm is for wealth and prosperity and seeing things happen. And a lot of the times to get wealth and prosperity moving, you have to have people who involved in the process who are not trying to micromanage the way a country works, the way business works. Quite lastly, my simple objection is this, going through all the standpoints of Romney, he doesn't really sound as unintelligent as he probably comes off. But I think that's part of the things that's important to understand about him is he really is an educated person who's rich as hell, and he has no grip on anything that's happening in reality whatsoever. It's so... I don't want to say that he's just out there, because he's not an insane person, as some politicians really are really bad when it comes to that. It's just that he lacks perspective. The perspective needed to be president. Say whatever you want about President Obama. I've been critical about him before he was elected. I've toned down quite a bit on that. He certainly does have a perspective on what it takes to be a president. And whether you agree with his policy making or not, he definitely has that perspective. And I think Mitt Romney lacks that, and I think that's the big number one reason why there's no chance in hell he's ever going to get elected. That's just personal opinion. I fully encourage you to take a look at his, business life, take a look at his governorship, and take a look at his campaign and come to your own conclusion. There's certainly not that much to look at when you look at Obama himself, but Obama has that perspective, the perspective of a level head when it comes to intervening with things. And even though I don't agree with his ideology, I think that perspective is much more important than just base ideological opinions about things. Because I can deal with somebody being a stereotypical liberal, I just can't deal with somebody who doesn't have a real good grip on what the role of being president is, or sort of the attitude you should have when you're the president. That Obama clearly has. He has that down to a T. So, even though public opinion doesn't seem to reflect that ever, I really think that that's obvious to me. All right, so that does summarize a lot of my opinions about a couple different things that are happening right now, and I'm going to try to do an update once in a while to sort of lay out more opinions. And I really hope that it didn't seem like a disjointed ramble, even though it mostly was. And hopefully the next time I decide to do another update, it'll come out a little bit cleaner than this one has. But I really thank you guys for watching. If you took the time to actually sit down through the whole thing. And if you have any sort of opinions or feedback, leave it in the comments thread. And I can't guarantee that I will read or respond to any of those, because I've seen YouTube comments, and I don't know if I really want to sit through and thumb through them. But if you have a particularly good point of view, I would still appreciate to hear it, even if it's wrong, which it may be. I'm not sure. I don't know who you are personally, but thank you for watching. And feel free to check back on my channel every once in a while, and I'll have another video blog similar like this, and hopefully with other current event type things like I commented here. And hopefully, and I'm hoping, that you got something out of the whole discourse, all right? So have a nice day.